Welcome to another episode of Bookends. I'm your host, David Buck. Today we're actually doing our first interview, and we've always ventured to go to the top, and we've gone to the top. We've gotten Taylor Molly with me today, a professional spoken word artist, a writer, a teacher, a performer on HBO's Deaf Poetry Jam. You might see him there. What we're going to do today is briefly talk to Taylor about the teaching of English, the teaching of poetry, but also the writing of poetry and how poetry is a part of our lives. Taylor, what is poetry in your estimation?
Well, I think everybody who calls themselves a poet should probably have a definition of what poetry is. And the one that I have used for a long time, which I've recently decided is no longer as good as I want it to be, is poetry is a meaningful comparison between two essentially dissimilar things rendered in language worth experiencing more than once. The experiencing thing allows me to fudge things and come at poetry from a more of a spoken word angle. But the problem with that is that by saying that all poetry is essentially a meaningful comparison between two essentially dissimilar things, I'm really setting up a kind of poetry where metaphor is the central operating principle. And I'm realizing as I begin to study more, I just started taking a poetry workshop at the New School for the first time since graduate school, that definition is very limiting. So that's the one that I'm using now, but I am constantly looking for a new one.
I'm writing the poem that'll change the world, and it's Lily Wilson at my office door. Lily Wilson, the recovering like addict. The worst I've ever seen, so like bad, that the entire 8th grade started calling her like Lily, like Wilson, like, until I made my classroom a like-free zone, and she could not speak for days. But when she finally did, it was to say, "Mr. Molly, this is so hard. Now I have to think before I say anything." Well, imagine that, Lily. It's for your own good, even if you don't like it. I'm writing the poem that'll change the world, and it's Lily Wilson at my office door. Lily is writing a research paper for me about how Arab Americans shouldn't be allowed to fly on domestic airplanes. So I think I'm writing the poem that's going to change the world, and here comes like Lily, like Wilson at my office door. She's having trouble with her paper. She's having trouble finding sources for her paper, which is to say ones that back her up. They all seem to argue in favor of what I thought I was against. And it took 4 years of college and 3 years of graduate school and every incidental teaching experience I have ever had to let out only, "Well, that's a very interesting problem, Lily. But what do you propose to do about it?" That's what I want to know. And the 8th grade mind is a beautiful thing. Like a newborn baby's face, you can often see it change before your very eyes. I can't believe I'm saying this, Mr. Molly, but I think I'd like to switch sides. And I want to tell her to do more than just believe it, but to enjoy it. That changing your mind is one of the best ways of figuring out whether or not you still have one. Or even that minds are like parachutes, that it doesn't matter so much what you pack them with, so long as they open at the right time. Oh God, Lily, I want to say, you make me feel like a teacher. And who could ask to feel more than that? I want to say all of this, but I manage only, Lily, I am like so impressed with you. So I finally taught somebody something, namely how to change her mind. And I learned in the process that if I ever change the world, it's going to be one 8th grader at a time.
Is the spoken poem different from a poem you would find in an anthology? For instance,
sure.
Our students are reading poems in an anthology, so they're rigid, they're direct. Is a spoken word poem different?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I say spoken word is poetry written with the specific intent that the first time it's experienced, it's going to be heard before, if ever, it is read, which means that, you know, T.S. Eliot said that poetry should be difficult. by which I hate for him to say. I love the fact that he said poetry can communicate before it is understood. That I love. But the fact that poetry should be difficult, I think, led to the academization of the study of poetry.
Yes.
And by making it difficult, you would imagine T.S. Eliot, one of the hallmarks of the new critics who developed the close reading, to want to say, to want to be sure that the poems that he and his colleagues were studying had so much stuff packed in there, even in fact more than the writer intended to be there. So by saying poetry should be difficult, he was in essence giving permission to poets to pack their poems with the kind of dense allusions that he was anxious in looking to
Right.
see.
Right.
But when he said that, the most popular poet in America was Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who is as close to a spoken word poet
Right.
as the 19th century ever gets.
Right.
And his poems were recited in front of the fireside. They were memorized by school kids. A lot of kids, even into the 20th century, had to memorize The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere.
Right.
And it had a very spoken, lyrical quality to it. And T.S. Eliot essentially said, well, if that's what you think poetry is, well, then you don't know anything about poetry.
If you could present in one brief sentence your advice to the students here at BCC studying to become eventual teachers, what could you say to them?
Your love of teaching and your desire to inspire and educate the next generation is what is going to fuel your mission to become a teacher. The politics that you will encounter in the school system are going to be gargantuan and nitpicky, but don't let the politics of the school distract you or discourage you from what you know in your heart is the most important job that anyone could have.
Excellent. And if that fails, we have the education tax. And we can bring it. Let's get a little personal, Taylor.
Okay.
We've talked about the profession of teaching. You're dead. Your tombstone is large enough. I don't know, you didn't make a lot of money in your life, but it's large enough only for a brief statement or word or sentence. What would it be?
Well, I just was visiting my parents' tombstones, and their ashes are buried up in Connecticut. And on my mother's tombstone, it said, "Be lovely and do no harm. Provide, provide, provide." And on my father's, it says, "God grant me the courage to change the things I can," which is, of course, the first part of the Serenity Prayer, even though it was the last part that he loved the most, the wisdom to know the difference. But the tombstone was so small that we didn't think it was appropriate to put, "God grant me the wisdom to know the difference," or else nobody would know what he was talking about. But if I had a very small tombstone, I think the 3 words that I would put would be yes, yes, yes. Yes is the most beautiful word in the English language. And they did a study once and asked people, if I asked you a question right now, do you think you would be likely to say agree with it or disagree with it? And overwhelmingly, people say, without even knowing what the question is going to be, they say, I think I would disagree.
Interesting.
It's so much easier to say no, because to say no denies any connection. You don't have to have any responsibility.
Yes.
It's so much easier to be a critic. It's so much easier in the spoken word. You watch Def Poetry Jam, a show that I'm becoming less and less enamored with as the seasons go on. There seems to be a little bit too much anger and not enough beauty. You watch a show like that and people are so fired up by talking about what they are against and what they despise, and very few people are talking about what they actually want to stand up for and what they want to be a part of and what they believe in. So my tombstone would say yes, yes, yes.
Very good. Good answer. I'm going to quote a poet, Pablo Neruda, South American poet. This is how he talked about his encounter with poetry. And it was at that age, poetry arrived in search of me. I don't know where it came from. How did you arrive at poetry? Or if we take that poem, how did poetry arrive for you?
Well, my dad was an occasional poet. He wrote poems for special occasions, sort of Dr. Seussian rhymes.
You called it doggerel, I believe.
Doggerel, that's
yes.
right, that's right. And for my mother's 50th birthday party, he wrote a poem. So I was aware at a very young age how one could, with a glass of champagne in one hand and a yellow legal pad in another, delight and entertain people with words that you had worked on and revised over the previous months. My mother also wrote children's books, so I was sort of hardwired for linguistic enjoyment from the get-go. But how did I arrive at poetry? Very gently, I suppose. I mean, you know, with parents who were writers, it was easy for me to see that as a possible direction that I would want to go in. It didn't become a job for me, and I don't think anybody should write poetry thinking this is going to be my full-time job. I'm a full-time poet. There may be 12 of us in the country. I don't teach. I just go around the country reading my poetry to people who will pay to listen, which is a wonderful dream that I am living. But I didn't start out that way. I was a teacher and I did poetry on the side, and gradually I thought, you know what? There's a college out in Pemberton, New Jersey that would like me to go and do a reading, and they'll pay me this much money. My first reading, first academic reading, the director of student activities asked how much it would cost for me to go to Fargo, North Dakota to read, and I said it was going to cost you $500, you know, and he said, fine, that's it, okay, no problem. But, you know, there's a college in Pemberton, New Jersey that wants you to come, but it's, the reading will be at noon, you know, and there's no way that I could continue to be a good teacher and be free to drive to New Jersey at noon for a reading. I got to go do this show in a couple, you know, in a couple of minutes. So I was very gradually got my wheels spinning, and this will be my 5th fall not in the classroom. School has already started for you, obviously, but so this was this is the 5th year that I begin to think, oh, it's fall, I'm going to be going back into the classroom. Oh, no, I won't, because I don't do that anymore. I still teach. I still think that I teach, because Horace, the Latin poet, said that the task of the poet is to instruct and to entertain. Actually, he said to instruct or to entertain, and we must reserve our greatest approbation for those who can do both. And so that's what I try to do. And that's also the job of the teacher, to instruct or, well, not or entertain. For a teacher, you got to do both. But any teacher who does not see his or her job as an entertainer is going to have a bunch of sleepy students in the class.
I agree.
This is called undivided attention, what every teacher wants and few of us ever get. This is a true story. Undivided attention. A grand piano wrapped up in quilted pads by movers, tied up with canvas straps like classical music's birthday gift to the insane, is gently nudged without its legs out an 8th floor window on 62nd Street. This piano dangles in April air from the neck of the mover's crane, Chopin's shiny black lacquer squares and dirty white crisscross patterns hanging like the second to last note of a concerto played on the edge of the seat, the edge of tears, the edge of 8 stories up going over. It's a piano being pushed out of a window and lowered down onto a truck, and I'm trying to teach math in a building across the street. Who can teach when there are such lessons to be learned? All the greatest common factors are delivered by long-necked cranes and flatbed trucks, or come through everything, even air, like snow. See, snow falls for the first time every year, and every year my students rush to the window as if snow were more interesting than math, which, of course, it is. So please, let me teach like a Steinway, spinning slowly in April air, so almost falling, so hinderingly dangling from the neck of the mover's crane, so on the edge of losing everything. Let me teach like the new snow falling. Thanks very much.